Welcome to the Academy of Esports Podcast. My name is James O'Hagan, and for this episode, I welcome back Stephen Reid. Stephen Reid is a senior custom engagement manager with Microsoft. Stephen, thank you for being on the podcast today.
Thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me for the second time.
And what we are doing this episode is in promotion of the Games Make a Difference Symposium, which will be at Purdue University, April 8th, down in West Lafayette, Indiana. Stephen, it's going to be a little different than where you are right now in the world. West Lafayette, Indiana is its own unique place, and I can't wait to show it to you, my own alma mater, my campus. But before we get into a bit of the meat of the conversation around the symposium and some of the current work that you're doing, I have some questions for you, different than the last time, because the last time we jumped right in. But these are to help people get to know you a little better. So number one, what's a game, and it doesn't have to be a video game, that stands out as having been important to you at some point in your life, and why was that experience meaningful?
That's a really good question. And I immediately go to Command & Conquer Red Alert for two reasons. The first is I was heavily bullied at school, like really badly bullied consistently for years, for a whole variety of reasons that I won't go into, but some really difficult situations that led to other kids isolating me. And so I didn't have deep connections as with friends at school. And then I met one very good friend who we have traveled together throughout life. And in fact, I was playing Command & Conquer with him yesterday, and he and I discovered Command & Conquer together. He lived in the street next to me, and I said to him, I play this game and you control tanks and I control tanks. And then we tried to fight each other, and he was like, sure, I'll do that. And it was PlayStation 1, and we used a link lead. And he's gone on to become an electrician. And at the time he extended the link lead so that we tried to run a link lead from his house right across the street. Cars drove over it and everything into my house, and it never really worked because but it was what we tried. It was so good. Anyway, that game was my social salvation in terms of giving me a place to be and someone to be there with. And he traditionally played the Allies. I traditionally played the Soviet army, and we played an alternative World War II together for many years, and of course other things came from that. But that was my salvation in that sort of difficult bubble, and brought me a friend for life. The second reason I put that game out there is because it was then the very first game that I ever taught with. I've taught with 140 games now in my career, in over 70 countries. But that was the first game because I knew it so well, and it was the alternative World War II. I was invited to do a history unit when I was first starting out, and I was like, I know what we could do. It was a World War II. You had to teach the Maginot Line and the importance of the French border and the Germans and so on. And I was like, I know what we could do. And it led to weeks and weeks and weeks of students playing Command & Conquer and really deeply understanding the European geography and the political the overtones, and understand. I mean, I had students that could tell me exactly where Trieste was and why it was significant in World War II, because they had either conquered or liberated it as part of our unit of Command & Conquer Red Alert. And the other teachers at the time were like, how do your students know so much about both European geography and European history? And I was just like, because we play games. And so that game has been significant for those two reasons.
And if you would like some more details about Stephen's experiences with that game and teaching with the games, first episode of the podcast that Steve and I did, we went into quite a bit of depth about that. We won't go rehash my side of the story, but there's a lot of depth in that with Stephen just shared. But for the second question, little different question here. Maybe it's totally eccentric, or maybe it's quite traditional, but what is your superpower? That thing that you do better than most people, or what do you wish you could do?
Oh, so it's so difficult to answer this as part of your own, like, it's like, hey, my superpower is my looks or whatever. It's ridiculous. But and I don't believe that incident. I'm just putting that out there. But there are I often say to people, there are many, many things in this world that I am not good at. Okay. and many, many more that I don't even know that I'm not good at. But what I have always been very passionate about, and therefore I think have developed as a career and become good at, is making the connections between play and learning. Something that I think society generally has kind of over decades of traditional, and maybe even centuries of traditional teaching methods, we've come to forget. In fact, I was learning at the BET show this year from a play practitioner that 80% of parents do not know how to effectively play with their children. I mean, that's a staggering statistic.
Wow.
When we think, surely it's easy to just get on the floor and play Lego with your kids, right? Or draw with your kids, or they can't make believe, right? We can play make believe. I'll be the dinosaur, you'll be the human, run, run, run. But parents can't do it. 80% of parents can't do it. They've no idea how to do it. And that creates huge amounts of disconnect, which in turn perpetuates, because then each new generation of children don't know how to play with their children. And yet we all start as playful creatures. We all start as we all imagine, we all have little figures that we play with, we all make believe, we all build things and create things and then stand on them after when we're finished or whatever. We climb trees creatively. But we forget somewhere, 80% of us forget somewhere in the journey. And so I that's the one thing I've always been good at is being the child, and then but also being the adult at the same time, and recognizing how to bridge those two things. I make deep connections constantly. My head is constantly exploding with, we could do this, we could do that, we could do this. And in fact, in all of the, you do these Myers-Briggs things and you do these Clifton Strengths things. And I've just finished Emergenetics, which is a hugely a valuable one actually for insights if you haven't seen it already. But I've just completed all of those, and every single one of them comes out that I am ideator, creator, and strategic thinker. So that's what I'm good at. That's my superpower. You want an idea and you want to know how to make it work in the realm of education and play. I'm your guy.
Well, and again,
what I wish I could do was fly.
way to bring it back simply. That would certainly make your international travel a little bit easier too, if you could just fly. Yeah. But just as a side question, let me ask you this, because I know that we're kind of deviating from the formula that I've worked out here, but I have to ask this. Is it because are there not adult playgrounds because it would be silly or an adult would worry about getting hurt? Or is it because we just don't design playgrounds for adults?
So much to go into on this, because I read constantly about this, and I know we don't have much time, but I think first of all, it's social construct. For example, and I often use this example, possibly I did last time. If I went outside right now and climbed a tree, or while I was at the BET show, I started climbing railings. You got these railings that lead to.
I'm just picturing it. That's why I'm laughing.
Right. If I did that, someone would stop me. Security would stop me, or in a park in the middle of the park. If I was climbing a tree, someone would phone the police and they'd say, "There's a man climbing a tree in the park. Like he's just clambering around this tree," and the police would come and say, "Everything okay, sir?" It's just like, and yet we don't think twice about kids climbing trees. They're like, "Oh, look, he's climbing the tree. Now he's going to have to be careful or he'll fall," whatever. And we encourage it. But if I wanted to go out and climb a tree, they would call security at the event space or the police if it was generally public. And that's a stark difference. And yet, as a man, I'm a rock climber. I love rock climbing. I also like tree climbing. I like to clamber around trees, but to do that, I might have to go camping in the middle of nowhere where no one can see me, try to clamber a tree,
right,
and so on, because someone will take unkindly to it. But we also do the same with our teenagers. Like as soon as we hit teenage years, they're not allowed to BMX in the city. They're not allowed to skateboard. You're not allowed to rollerblade here. We give them these glorious spaces where skateboarding would be perfect. And then there's videos all over the internet where security guards are taking their skateboards off them. And we've literally, I've just spent the week in London. Everywhere in London that you could possibly grind a skateboard, they've literally spent public money designing and retrofitting these systems that stop children from playing. And as a result, there are now studies that have come out. I think the last one was 2018. There's studies that have come out to say that as a result of the cost of living in cities, and therefore families don't generally live there anyway, on top of this idea that we just don't design cities for children, cities are becoming, cities like London, Birmingham, Paris, Berlin, they're becoming child-free spaces. Our children don't exist in cities anymore, unless we want them to come in for commerce. So we encourage them to come in, do some shopping, spend some of mum and dad's money, and then leave again. But we don't encourage them. And so adult playgrounds is a wonderful idea. We just don't do it. I was that guy. I was a stepdad for many years, and I was the dad in the soft play center. I was in it, and I was running around, and the kids were loving it, and I was falling off edges and into ball pits and stuff like that, while all the other parents sat outside with their cups of tea watching and going, why is he in there with them? I was literally the only dad that was in there. And so I think it's a combination of a spectrum of social constructs that dictate to us there's a time and a place. Just stop that. Just, in fact, this is a little bit too personal, but I had an ex-partner who said to me once, you need to get rid of this game. I had a PlayStation 2 back then, and she said, you need to get rid of the PlayStation. And I said, and this came out the blue as part of our relationship. And I said, why? And she was like, it's just, I struggle with it. She said, men don't play, boys do. So you just need to get rid of the PlayStation.
Huh. Ex-partner.
Ex-partner.
Now, what I will say, though, is something I've seen, the invitation a lot of times for adults isn't there on a playground. Again, the playground is designed for a small child, and you can feel when a playground is designed for an adult to stand outside of it, not to play with their child, but to be there and observe, but not engage. Yeah. When I was just freshly divorced, since we're sharing personal stories, three very small children. There was a playground across the street from us in Deerfield, Illinois, fantastic playground, where it was designed for small children. But as an adult, I could walk up into the structure. I could, some of these things were massive. They were still child safe. It was fantastic. It was still child safe. But as an adult, I could walk into it. And I could feel the invitation was there, and you could see adults engaging with kids throughout the space, not just on the peripheries, but actually physically in it. But the other thing that I noticed that you alluded to earlier in your comments was, those teenage years. There's those cranky parents who I think we start to almost cut off kids from having access to playgrounds where, those teenagers, we can't have those teenagers at the playground. Right. Because my little kids can't play at it. Well, again, where's the sign that says this playground is for only, 3-year-olds to 10-year-olds? And then is it that magical age that they're not allowed to be there anymore? So yeah,
it's definitely, it's part of that conformity. It's like there's an expectation of the age that you're at. We're very good. I've said this before, actually, in other presentations. We as adults are very good at taking what children are and want and need, and we stick it behind paywalls and we package it up for them. Clothing, sports, whatever it is, gaming. Gaming is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and we're selling it back to kids. It's like, hey, see that play stuff you love to do? We could make a lot of money doing that, and we sell it back to them. And I know you and I have feelings and similar thoughts and feelings on that. And so, and we sell it back to them. And then when they don't do it the way we want them to do it, we chastise them and we tell them, hey, you're a teenager. You shouldn't be hanging around there. It's like, you skateboarder. You shouldn't be skateboarding in this area. You should be skateboarding out where no one can see you. Children should be seen and not heard, remember? And then when we do isolate them, and they sort of, where I lived in Scotland for a while, they had this skate park, and it was nowhere near the city. It was in the sort of fields, and they'd sort of dug this hole and concreted it and turned it into a skate park. And then the police were constantly circling it because they must be up to no good. And these kids, I'll be honest with you, I went, because as a skateboarder BMXer primarily, I would go along there sometimes, and they were so welcoming. It didn't matter that I was a 40-year-old guy. In fact, I fell once on my rollerblades, and it was just instant. All these teenagers came over and they were like, "You all right?" And then they lifted me up, and they were like, and one of them said to me, "Next time you go down, keep your shoulders back, because that's where your central weight is." And I was just like, "Thanks." And it was such a good atmosphere just to be among them. And yet, several times an hour, the police would go around and look at them and shine a torch in to see what they were doing. And now, I'm not saying that they weren't at some point, or some degree of them weren't up to no good, in as we would call socially up to no good, but at some point. But generally, we were the ones who had isolated them in this field. We were the ones that had said, "Oh no, you can't play where you want to play, you have to play there, and then we'll circle you with police." And it was just, even the again, I'll go on a small rant, but the no ball games signs, the UK's full of them. Everywhere you go, there's a no ball games sign. And it's just, and they're always in the most appropriate places for ball games, which is why they put them there, right? Big open spaces with a big flat wall that somebody lives behind. And you just think, oh, if you had a football here or a basketball, this would be amazing. But there's a no ball game sign, and someone will phone the police if you start kicking a ball around. And it's just ridiculous. I once saw a small church in the UK, and it was a church, a beautiful little church on this massive lawn, huge, expansive lawn. And it was natural in this little town for everybody to want to, and the weather was lovely in the summer, so you could go and sit on a bench or a lawn somewhere, and everyone was like, "Oh, that lawn's nice." And it was this tiny little building in this acres and acres and acres of land. But they had signs all over the place that said, "No games." Not even no ball games, just no games. Like chess, maybe. I was just like, oh, this is, I love that, because it's stuck with me. It's like, why are we constantly caging the play space? Well, and then we complain when we're overworked and we're tired and we're depressed.
Well, to speak to Stephen's point a little bit too, having spent a lot of time in the west of Ireland myself now, the only place I have seen that feels completely isolated, completely cut off, where you can't go up to it, it was Mountbatten's castle, which is the uncle of the Queen's husband, right. Lord Mountbatten. That was the only place in all of Ireland, and it was just one of these old, obviously English country estates where the lawns were well manicured, but the walls were very much up. So yeah, west of Ireland, a little different than it sounds like the UK. In fact, try calling the Gardaí in west of Ireland, and they'll come around in about 4 or 5 days, to take care of your issue.
So you can say there was a man in that tree.
Yes, exactly.
4 days ago.
Right. Wow. We've really gone off the streamlined script that I've developed for the podcast, but I'm totally fine with it because we're getting into the good stuff. Because now we're down to the third question. Name that one song. Whenever it hits your speakers, you're gonna sing along to it, whether you sing poorly or fantastically.
Who knows how I sing, and I daren't record myself and find out. But I love it. I love singing. I love dancing, and I quite often dance in the house, regardless. But I'll also dance publicly. But there's so many songs, and I could go into so many groups that I love. I like a lot of sort of so one of the issues is I like a lot of instrumental electronica. So things like Röyksopp, for example, from Norway, and so I lyrics wise are quite lacking, but if I had to choose a song that when it comes on the radio I absolutely have to sing, it's The Never Ending Story, because that was my entire childhood anyway, and then when it comes on the radio it's just like boom. And I remember watching Stranger Things, and they did the whole spoilers, there's a Never Ending Story scene, a wonderful Never Ending Story scene in Stranger Things, and it was just the best.
Again, did you cry when the horse when they go to the swamp?
Oh, the swamps of sadness and losing our tax.
Look, if you didn't cry from the swamps of sadness, I'm sorry.
Get yourself checked.
Yeah, you need to
get yourself checked for some sort of issue. But seriously, the other day actually I saw, and you can check this out on the internet, if you look for Never Ending Story cosplay and specifically look at Artax, or the Swamps of Sadness.
Oh no, I can't imagine.
Somebody went to a cosplay, and they were dressed as Atreyu, and they looked great. They had the hair and the sort of leather jerkin and everything on. And then all they had was a piece of leather, which led to a horse's head.
No.
And they could put the horse's head anywhere down on the ground and then go, Artax. It was genius. It was genius. And it looked like the horse was in the floor. It was so good. It's the best cosplay I've ever seen.
Now, see, the reason why we laugh so much at that is because how sad we were when that happened in the movie. Again, the first time you see it, you're like, oh, and I'm like, I think it was probably 9 or 10. It's like, the horse just died.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert, if you haven't found it out already, he comes back at the end. All right. And if you hadn't seen it yet, sorry, you're almost 35 years too late at this point.
Yeah.
All right. Now, last pre-show question. What is the one thing about your field that surprises you when they first hear about it? Again, you were working for a long time with Immersive Minds, doing a lot of work around games, gameplay. Again, 140 games, 70 different countries. But now, again, you're working at Microsoft. You're doing a lot of work specifically around Minecraft and education. You've really brought that to life. What is the thing that surprises people? And maybe this can lead us into the conversation about your current work that you're doing.
Yeah. So I think the thing that surprises people the most is, I mean, there's it's still considered a fringe science. And there's so many people say to me, games in education. And you and I are going to be in Illinois talking about exactly that. Indiana. My fault. We're going to be in Indiana talking exactly about that. And even the work that I'm doing in Indiana, there's still people coming to the table at this point saying, what, Minecraft? Games. And so I think I'll split this into two, and I'll keep the first one brief, which is simply people don't, one of the surprising things is when I talk about, we're going to be using technology to teach, and then we talk about that technology as games and game-based learning, they go, huh. And they're really surprised because, you mean I could take my PlayStation from home and do something in my classroom? I say, yeah. And the second thing that I think that then comes with that as a surprise is the sheer engagement that it dictates. We put a tweet out for esports in South Africa, for example. We just, as a school system, one of the clients I'm working with, they said to me, how should we introduce this and see if we can, do you want us to put something out in school and see if we can draw kids in? And I said, and they said, oh, we should put a letter out to parents. And I said, just tweet it out to your community and say, hey, we're thinking of doing this. Who would be interested? They got 2,000 parent replies because they have their whole school system. They got 2,000 plus parent replies in 24 hours because the parents had said, oh, your school's doing an esports thing. Would you be interested? And the kids were, yes. So they replied. And, you know, when you put something out in any school anywhere in the world and 2,000 children come back and say, I'll do that. Mm-hmm. Like even any curriculum after school club, you know, it's just like, you want to do a coding club. Did you get 2,000 kids? Probably not. No. And yeah, right. And so when we engage games or children through this platform and this media that they already know, the big, unsurprising to me, but the surprising thing to teachers, and it's not their fault. Many teachers aren't gamers, or they game, but they just didn't make the connection between one and the other. But it's the drive that they just didn't quite see coming. It's the 100% attendance. We do projects, and I say to them, we're running a project at the moment called Blockonomics. And if where children live in a city and they learn about economics of life, everything from taxation to banking to postal services to food production and distribution, everything. And if you don't turn up to school, then in your world, you are in threat of losing your job because you get, 3 late days or whatever, or you might be docked pay, or you might, your job might be taken, for example, you might miss an opportunity, and so on. And when we run that project, we generally have 100% attendance throughout the entire project. No one doesn't show up and no one shows up late. And the teachers we run it with are like, I've never seen this before. Like they usually point at one kid or two kids and they go, they're never on time. And it's just like, well, they are this week. And so I think that's one of the big surprising things is just how impactful this is.
Well, and it goes to, here's the other thing too. People may hear that and go, "Oh, well, I'll get the same results." Initially, you may get the same results, but again, what are the goals? What is it you're trying to accomplish? Again, in the school system in South Africa, I know, speaking with a person who I know works with you quite a bit, well, works with Microsoft Education quite a bit, Ken Shelton, who has done work in South Africa as well. For some schools, just getting kids to, as you are alluding to, come to school is a hard thing because of a variety of different barriers. How you set this up and how you structure this and how you, again, invite the children to come to school is sometimes more important than, let's say you have 100% attendance already and you ask the same question, because your goals are going to be very different. Let's say you have a big school system with very good attendance and you ask the same question. Are you going to do exactly what they were doing in South Africa? Probably not. There's, again, everything is, so that's where I think there's some art that comes into the work that we're doing. I think that a lot of people are still looking for those turnkey solutions. And I think, as you have found through your use of games, my use of games in the same way, there is no turnkey. There's a lot of you have to know these games. You have to know the ins and outs. You can't just necessarily always acquiesce to the students and say, well, teach me. You have to have some buy-in to it as well, too. You have to put skin in the game. You have to dedicate your own time into this as well, too.
Oh, absolutely. And that's I mean, we're in danger now of me going way down a rabbit hole. I'm a big, I'll need to be careful about how I phrase all of this, but I'm really passionate about that. I don't think everyone in the world needs to be an absolute game-based learning expert.
No,
it's not reasonable, because otherwise you've spent decades doing it. I started
but skin in the game is what I mean.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's where I'm going with that, is that where we're finding the biggest success, and actually there's two elements to this as well, where we're finding the biggest successes is where teachers, little groups of teachers generally, there's normally a core of people that go, I'll do that. Like down in South Africa, for example, we have Magdalene, for example, who's one of the teachers in the school system I'm talking about. And she just loved it so much from day one. She'd never played Minecraft before. And as soon as she got her hands on it and saw the impact with the kids, she was like, this is what I want to do. And she's now got permission from her school to become that person in her school as part of this wider system. And she's loving it. And her career is thriving as a result, because she's learning new things and she's taking PD courses and she's learning about new technologies and but also her teaching is thriving as well, because she's got this new repertoire of tools that she didn't have a year ago. And she's now responsible for running the esports leagues in that school. And when we talk about esports, and I know we're going to go into this in more detail, but I just need to be clear that this is esports is as and for education, not just esports in education, which we can talk about later. But yes, skin in the game is important. The second element of having that skin in the game is the legacy that it then leaves. So you become the inspiration for other teachers, or you become the person who can then say to another teacher, I'll do that with you. Or your students are like, oh, my teacher does that. And then, and they become your sort of little engine for moving this forward, because you were the person that did that. And so what you end up doing by having that skin in the game is you create this forward moving legacy, this constantly growing legacy of what will one day be looked at as normal. I mean, I hope you and I both hope that in 20 years' time, no one's debating this. We're just doing it because it's the way we should be teaching.
Well, and for some, I know it's a fight, even in my own school district where we've had success with our esports programs. I think there's still confusion. There's still questions about what this is. There's still questions about the value. But again, you did bring up a very good point. You talked about esports. Let me see if I say this right. You said esports as part of education as opposed to for with. You say it better.
We'll do it again. Soundbite.
Yes, here we go.
So I'm a big believer that all technology should be is, as, and for. So we can say, Minecraft is education, Minecraft for education, Minecraft as education, rather than just in. Esports in education is relatively easy. We set up an esports team you know, and it will, many American schools use it for scholarship, and it's great. I'm not knocking the value of those programs, but how do we make it curriculum relevant? How do we make it pedagogically important? How do we make it impactful on social and emotional learning? How do we make it career development facing? And so if we can take esports and make it is, as, and for education at every step of the way, then we are more likely to get the buy-in of our governments and our district authorities and even the teachers on the ground, rather than just saying, hey, everyone, we're going to run an esports program and we'll see how it works out. We'll get some kids along. We'll have some prizes. That's great. But we need to make it educationally relevant certainly for me to be interested and involved.
Well, and I hope to, again, as another plug for the symposium, April 8th at Purdue University, we did not really bring in a lot of gamers per se. This is when you look at the agenda of speakers, it is more from the academic, looking at things from a socially connected aspect. Because as you alerted to, esports in education or gaming in education is nice, but the impact is all the other parts of it, especially when you're talking about now things at a university level. It was nice for last couple of years that we've seen a business major certificate in esports, a hotel restaurant management certificate in esports, I can now do an arena thing. Okay, cool. But really, when I look at things, I look at, again, a university like Purdue, which has a history of patent development, which has a history of engineering development. I look at that and go, now let's take that gaming love, that intrinsic motivation around it, and let's turn that into research. Let's turn that into building the faster computer, the nanotechnology that's going to take those computers. Because again, nothing that makes a gamer more upset than lag. So let's develop the technologies to cut down on that lag, and then that makes everything a little better. Yeah. Those are the things I think people very easily miss in all this. But what I also think that a lot of people are missing, especially because, again, we've talked about in our last conversation that we had about how a lot of games are pulled off the education games don't have a lot of value. Microsoft's Minecraft is not an education game, but it now has a very big position in education. And you've developed something new related to the current crisis that's going on, the war. Let's just call it what it is. It's a war in Ukraine. Nice. And as a history teacher myself, I minored in history with a focus on World War II, Cold War, and Eastern and Soviet Russian history. And I'm watching this, trying to explain this to kids. And as much as a kid I would love to break it down to a 30-second TikTok video. There are layers on this that can't be, I think, transferred as well in a TikTok video as you're alluding to with the work that you're doing. Talk about with what you are working on with Minecraft and the Ukraine war, Russian-Ukraine war.
Sure. Right. So many years ago, 2015 was the height of what we called the refugee crisis in Europe. When the Arab Spring had begun to unfold, and the conflict in Syria and Libya and Egypt was having issues and so on, and people were moving into Europe as a result. So we're talking specifically about the movement of people as refugees. And politically, Europe had a real issue with that. Now, I could go into so much depth about how at the time we argued why those people shouldn't be allowed in Europe. And then the Ukrainian conflict starts, and everyone's like, come in, you're welcome, you're white, just like us, come on. And I've just put a Facebook post out about how strange this all seems from a British and European perspective on that front. But we won't go into that in depth, simply because the movement of people is the same anywhere in the world, and we should all be worried about the forced movement of any of our brothers and sisters. And so at the time, I was working in schools across the UK as well as parts of the other world. But in the UK, of course, I have a sense of pride in the way that our students are raised and taught. And what I was hearing from some kids, because when I'm in schools, I quite often talk about, if we're doing a history lesson, I'll quite often say, hey, what do you think about this? And then we get the feedback. And it's just small conversation, but I'm just chipping away and researching. And I was hearing things like, 11-year-old boys were saying to me, yeah, refugees, they come over here and they take our jobs. And I was like, you're 11, you don't have a job. And they're like, well, that's what my dad says. So suddenly I was listening to this rhetoric, which, let's face it, the British media was not helping. The British media was perpetuating the idea that refugees are thieves and refugees will come and take your jobs and refugees will flood your cities. And the reason you can't have healthcare is because of refugees.
And this led into the start of the movement, the Brexit movement, and a lot.
Which absolutely, I mean, Brexit was founded on the idea that we needed to secure our borders. And so
you have an island.
I know, right? This is crazy. And so what was really interesting about all of that was that I was hearing this sort of negative rhetoric. Now, it is not, sometimes I think it is my job, but we have to be very careful about what it's not for me to tell a child that they should think and vote politically in a certain way. I want them to be nice, kind, empathetic people. Mm-hmm. I want them to go out into the world and be good citizens, but it's not up to me to say, you can't vote Conservative, you can't vote Republican, that's ridiculous. You can't vote Democrat, that's ridiculous. You can't vote for him or her. And so we have to be super careful about that, of course, because there's a fine line between that education and that sort of like political nudging or even brainwashing. And so we need to be super careful. I mean, and I know there's lots of big things coming out just now with the banning of books, and it's just we need to be so careful about how we traverse this landscape. And so, but what we can do is we can help our children to see the world through different lenses. And so between 2015 and 2018, I took it upon myself to develop, and the wonderful team behind Immersive Minds, we developed what we called the Refugee Crisis Minecraft World. And that was a series of lessons based around discussion points, deep thinking, human relevant discussion points that they met as they moved through a Minecraft world. So part one, for example, is literally called Leaving Home. And you follow a narrative in Minecraft where you speak to your granddad who says, look, I can't come with you. Your mum and dad went ahead to find safe passage and they haven't come back. You're going to have to leave. And we used this narrative because we worked with refugee charities in the UK. And this was a very real story. Many children's parents or one parent leaves to go find safe passage, doesn't come back for a variety of reasons, terrible reasons, and the child is left to then go themselves. Or alternatively, they have to go themselves and maybe their parents or their grandparents are already gone or struggling or ill health or injured and can't come with them. And so children are leaving on their own. And we've heard about this all over the world. There's children standing at borders asking to get in, and it's harrowing. And so we started with section one. You leave your granddad, you've lost your parents. How do we navigate this world? And so, and they have to there's little games where they have to go upstairs and they have to pack 3 things and they have to make a choice of all these objects that we've given them and things. They then have to go and speak to strangers. And it's funny because, again, the British children, and I set this up, I'll just caveat this by saying that I set the whole thing up to look and feel like a British town. Middle England, red brick housing in rows, shops, amenities, car parks. It felt very European, or certainly very British. And then as part of the initial lesson, I set up these breaking news, almost like fake BBC reports that said, Britain is under attack. We're being shelled. Many citizens are being told to go to Morocco, get on a boat and get across to Europe and then move on to Africa because Europe is also in danger. And it was fascinating when I ran these reports out because the kids were like, well, that's never going to happen. And I said, why? And they said, because we're Britain. Like, nobody attacks Britain. Fascinating stuff. Like these assumptions that we make about how our troops can go anywhere they want, but no one's coming here. That's ridiculous. Mm-hmm. And so that view of the world is really interesting to me. And so then I'll keep it short because I know we've not got much time, but the narrative followed these same children then through talking to strangers to then be told where to go. And then there was discussion points around like, can you trust these people? And then there was soldiers that they spoke to, police officers. They then had to go through a minefield to get to the docks, and the minefield would literally kill the players, and the kids were like, I didn't make it. And there was this whole idea about them not making it in these harrowing minefields. It was just really, and then when they got to the docks, there was only enough boats for some of them. So then there was the whole, who do you leave behind? Which was, again, fascinating. I do this. This is all part of a system of teaching I do called teaching the tough stuff. And I just don't believe that we're having enough of these discussions, even things like gender equality. Critical, for me, that is absolutely critical to teach young women and young men, or young girls and young boys, about gender equality from the beginning. And I was finding when they got to the boats and they were finding that there was only 10 boats, but there was 20 students, the boys in the classroom were like, well, we'll go obviously because we're boys. Like, we can work and we're strong and we can make money. And then we send the money back to the women. And I'm just like, we believe that? Like, we really believe that? And they were like, well, I mean, what can a woman do at the other side? And I'm just like, wow, these are young, impressionable, either just preteen or teenagers that literally think we should leave all the women at home in the war zone. It's fascinating. And so there was teaching to be done. And then there's 3 pieces at the end. One, they land and they have to be processed, and they go through, can you access education, law, food? Are you allowed, if you're mugged as a refugee, can you just go to the police? If you're robbed, can you just go to the police? Or what are your rights in this new space? How do you integrate effectively? The second was the human aspect of building affordable housing and allowing people to live with dignity when they arrive. And then the third was your safe space, which I'll tell you more about in a second because I can see you want to talk.
Well, I think the only thing that I think is very different from the 2015 Arab Spring versus now with this humanitarian crisis of around, I think it said 3.5 million Ukrainians now have gone into Poland, and in fact the area that I live
10 million
here,
have left.
Is it 10?
It's up to 10 million have been displaced. Yeah.
Given that the Chicago area has one of the largest Polish populations in the world outside of Warsaw and outside of Poland, and the Ukrainian population here is also very big. I know that we've already started taking in some refugees, but I know Poland has been one of the major ones. The thing that's very different this time is the information that's out there, because you're talking now about a very, we'll say a country with a very developed cyber warfare division that can put out misinformation and information in new ways. And now it's been 7 years. The 7 years of how information is getting put out there is very different.
Yeah.
That is one of the other parts of this too, that I think is so important for students to realize. I've even seen it with some of my own kids who have interest in this topic are putting videos up online. And I'm saying, well, that video of that plane was taken from this isn't even a MiG. This isn't even these aren't even, there's still the work that needs to be done on the social media aspect of this, because there is so much what looks like fantastic information, which is really not. It's either misinformation or it's something that is confusing to a child. That's why I'm saying there's been this isn't just a simple 30-second TikTok. I'm going to explain what's going on. You can do that as the setup, but the work is, how do we explain this into matters and as you're presenting into ways that children are going to grasp and understand? And again, you're taking this from just the humanitarian crisis of itself is a discussion that is a massive part of this, beyond the geopolitical ramifications of everything else going on.
And one of the things we do with that refugee crisis piece, and we'll get to the Ukraine part because we've re-released it, or I've started resharing it recently, is one of the critical things I often say to children is, why did they write that? And it doesn't matter if it's the BBC or Al Jazeera or Russian, some sort of Russian television or, whatever. I say to them, let's think about why they've put that out there. So then they look at the source and they were able to say, well, they would say that because, and they would say that because. And then we start, and quite often I think we don't, there's the whole thing about, the kid says, but why? But why? But why? I'd always encourage that. I'm like, keep that going right into your adulthood. Ask why. Why did they tell you that story? Why was it important for the BBC to tell you exactly that today and not tomorrow or yesterday? And tell it exactly in that way and so on. Why was that the headline? And then the kids break it down. That critical analysis is absolutely vital.
Right.
So with the conflict in Ukraine, the refugee crisis had already had hundreds of thousands of downloads across, I think the last time we counted, it was like 64 separate countries had given us the bulk of these resources. And we've been working with Americans who had said, oh, this is relevant to the Mexican border. And we've had people in China have said to us, oh, this is relevant to the people trying to come over from North Korea when they defect from North Korea into China and other parts of the region. And so suddenly, and of course, much in the Middle East as well. And so what we'd started to do was sort of paint this picture and this tapestry actually of all of the different places that this would be relevant. It was also met, and I think it's worth saying on the podcast, it was also met with really quite negative. There was people from certain groups, one of which was a white supremacist group, who threatened to car bomb one of my staff members' car and said, "You keep putting stuff out like this, we're going to get you." And we had to involve the police, and Interpol became involved. But as a company, we put it out anyway, because my attitude is if these are the people you're annoying, you're doing your job. But it was real. She wasn't allowed to bring her car to work for a few months, and it was really quite difficult time.
Wow.
But since the conflict in Ukraine has unfolded, we've rejigged it a little. It's just a few sort of contextual mentions and things. The way we designed it was it could work anywhere anyway. And now what we're trying to do is encourage as many people now to pick this out again and say, hey, there's this terrible conflict. It's displacing millions of people. Let's talk. Let's talk about why historically this has happened and continues to happen. And let's see if we can find solutions to each new generation. Because let's face it, what we're trying to do, it's too late for us. We allowed it to happen, just like we allowed the last rhino to die. The last black rhino is now gone on our watch. We have an opportunity now for the children of tomorrow to not kill the last blue whale, or to not let another refugee crisis unfold. Whether they're Russian or they're British or they're Indian or they're Chinese, it doesn't matter. We have an opportunity for better human beings to come.
And I think, as you're alluding to too, even back to the earlier comment that you made with the student who said, well, this is Britain, why would that happen here? Again, you asked me a year ago, would there be another war in a European country? I would have said chances are probably not, beyond what has already happened in Ukraine when they took over the Odessa region. But then you start to look and go, oh, well, now I see why Poland is so nervous, or why Hungary is so nervous, or the Czech Republic or Slovakia, or these countries that have seen this before in a lot of the adults' lifetimes. That these things are very recent. And while in our mind, they're not, these are things that, again, history does have a tendency to unfortunately repeat itself. And again, we see it as you're just alluding to with the humanitarian crisis that was created from the Syrian war, from the Arab Spring in the United States. We have Haitian, Cuban illegal immigration, Mexican and Guatemalan immigration. It's not something that we can just turn a blind eye to and just go, well, what does that matter? It's as you're saying, using these opportunities in these games to teach in ways that are meaningful for children. Stephen, before we get out of here, just again, I cannot wait for you to be a part of the conversation at Purdue April 8th, but also if people want to get some more information about Stephen, there's a previous episode that I will tag into the show notes for this one. Stephen, anything else you wish to share with the audience before the show, or for those people who may be coming to see you and then are going to pick this up after the show?
Yeah, the only thing I would say is, first of all, thanks for tuning in and having an interest in anything that involves games and game-based learning. It's a fight, it's a fringe science, but it will one day be normal. And if you need anything, or you have an idea... Yeah, right. I do. And if you have an idea, or you have a project, or you don't know where to get started, or you want to pick up esports, or you like the idea of the refugee crisis, or gender equality, or any of the teaching the tough stuff, anything at all, my Twitter is right below. Please reach out, follow me, reach out, and we'll make it happen.
That's Stephen Reid, EDU. That's Reid spelled R-E-I-D for those of you who are listening. So, and again, I will have a link to Stephen's Twitter handle in the show notes as well. Stephen Reid, community. Now I forget what your title was at Microsoft.
Customer Engagement PM.
Customer Engagement PM, Scotsman, proud Scotsman. Yes, Stephen Reid, thank you for being, again, a guest on the Academy of Esports Podcast.
Most welcome. Thanks, James.
That will do it for this week on the Academy of Esports. I've been your host, James O'Hagan. Esports are organized competitive video games allowing schools to redefine their athletic culture, diversify opportunities for student participation, promote good physical and mental health, increase collegiate scholarship pathways, and play games. We can never forget the importance of play. The mission of the Academy of Esports is to support these ideals. The vision of the Academy of Esports is for all students to experience the fun and joy of playing competitive video games. You may follow me on Twitter at Jim O'Hagan. That's at JIMOHAGAN, and through the Academy of Esports account at TAO Esports. It's a great way to get the latest blog posts, podcast episodes, and news coming out of esports and education. And remember, you can continue your engagement by going to www.taoesports.com. You can also connect through Facebook at www.facebook.com/TAOesports. Thanks again for listening, and I look forward to our time again next week.